So, Alastair Campbell, here we are, Drugstore Culture Vodcast number 9, and it's great to see you. And I suppose the notional reason to have you here is this latest volume, number 7 of the Diaries. I'm one of the people in Britain who has all of them, plus the digests. So I keep them coming.
Patrick Loughran, who you probably know, used to work with us and still works for Tony now. He is absolutely adamant. He is the person who has read every single word, and he's adamant he's the first person to have read that one as well. So that because he gets them very, very quickly. Yeah. And he reads them very, very quickly, and he's.
Well, I've certainly read every word. I can.
Good man.
Yeah.
Do you feel a better person for it?
Obviously, yeah. Actually, I was going to draw your attention to page 464.
Oh, right. Okay.
No, it's all right. Actually, it comes out. I thought this sums up our relationship very well.
Okay.
Because this is when I'm at the Spectator, another age.
Yeah.
And we run a piece to which you object. And at first, Ancona seemed pretty bullish. This is June 2009. But by the time I'd finished my speech, I checked in with him to see where we were on it, and he caved in on all points.
Excellent.
Apology as drafted by me, donation to the charity, total acceptance, they could not stand up the story.
What was the story?
It was Camphor talking about Iraq, I think, or something like that.
Right.
Anyway,
it was about me trying to.
Yes. But this is the bit which I felt rang a bell of authenticity. Matthew being reasonable, so I decided to be likewise. And I have a memory of all our conversations when you were in number 10, that however much you took issue, and afterwards, there was a civility about it. Now, which was not necessarily reflected in the public image, but I always felt, and actually,
or I think you'd probably have some colleagues who would say that was not the case.
No, I'm sure that's true, but the point I wanted to make was that it may seem a slightly counterintuitive thing to look back on the era of so-called spin with rose-tinted spectacles, but there was a civility actually, and I think perhaps some of that has left the seat. I mean, do you feel that a bit about politics now?
Well, it's interesting. John Majors wrote about that, spoke about that this week, didn't he? And I think Trump has changed the game completely.
Yeah.
In many ways, and I think that when you have the sort of mini-me Trumps, whether it's Johnson or Orban or these people in different parts of the political jungle, where they seem to think that to get noticed, to be rude, to be unpleasant is kind of the way to go. And it's true, I definitely had an image created for me. I don't think it was real, but I had an image created for me that I was sort of, vicious and sweary and constantly looking for fights and all that sort of stuff. And I mean, I'm glad you sort of think that reflects the relationship, because I'll tell you what, I always felt that the journalists I never minded dealing with were the ones who I felt were trying to find out what was really happening, and also the ones who didn't think it was all about themselves. There's quite a few of those, and also the ones who didn't feel that they had to go along with a kind of conventional wisdom. And also the ones who were genuinely interested in politics. The ones I really can't stand are the total cynics who think there's no point to politics, they're all terrible, they're all evil and what have you. So I would put you in a tick against all of those categories, as it were. So I would never have felt a personal animus in the way that I did with some of them.
I mean, I felt during that era, the whole New Labour era, that something really interesting was going on, and that not to engage with it would have been a ridiculous sort of failure of public service journalism. And it was interesting. And one thing I never felt was wrong was the idea that Labour should professionalise its communication strategy. This seemed to me to be perfectly fine. And you and Peter and others and David Hill and always, it seemed to me, were simply prosecuting the case for a Labour government. And that never struck me as in itself mutilation of public discourse or anything like that, although it came to be presented as such, didn't it, by some people? Caricatured, I think. But,
and also, people say that's about Iraq, but actually it happened long.
No, it was long before. No, long before.
No, it's interesting when, if you go back to the first volume, when we were in opposition, two of my favourite other country leaders, Bill Clinton and Paul Keating, both saying that the right have so many advantages already, that we should not give them any more. And
Yeah.
we had, over the years, given them a huge advantage by sort of saying, well, let the other side do all the kind of professional media stuff. Let them do the proper campaigning. We are fine about, being publicly disunited and all saying different things and what have you. So that basic professionalisation, and I think also it signalled something to the public about the notion of, desperately trying to be competent.
Yeah.
And I think the minimum expectation of a public for their government is that they're broadly competent. It's why I think this government is in such a mess, is people look at it and think they're just not very good at what they do. And the thing about,
well, it'll interest you to know I've not been contacted officially by anyone from Number 10 since last year's election when I called for her to resign. Now, that would have been unthinkable in the Labour era. That however much I was disagreeing with a particular policy, every Friday when I was writing for the Sunday Telegraph and I was writing a column for them, I would get a call from someone in Number 10 just checking in.
Yeah, for
it
sure.
was. It was a kind of, it was no more than that. Just saying, here's what we're doing. What are you up to? What are you thinking?
Yeah.
And that's a marked difference. That's a change.
Well, that's it. May be. You see, the other thing that Trump has done is, and he's got this sort of massive social media following, and he's got the kind of megaphone that the White House gives you. But I think the other thing he's done is, from a strategic perspective, decided, or his people have decided, we don't need to worry so much about the mainstream media. Theresa May does not have that advantage.
Yeah, no, sure.
And she is being defined, whether she likes it or not, by in the main negatively, by her enemies inside her own party, by the opposition, though not enough in my view over Brexit, and also by a media that just doesn't rate them.
Yeah.
And so you have to have that professionalism. Look, I know as well as anybody, the media can be a complete, total pain in the arse, both collectively and individually.
Surely not.
Yeah, but if you don't at least have the capacity to reach out and make sure, because in the end it's about the public. Do the public understand what you're trying to do? And it's interesting within this volume, which, as you know, is all about Gordon's premiership. One of the things Gordon did when he first came in, no more spin, no more sleaze. Well, that's fine on one level, but one, it's defining your predecessor negatively, which I think is always a mistake.
And therefore the legacy, which was substantial.
Exactly, gets lost, and Ed Miliband then did the same thing in a way by not defending as robustly enough on the economy. But then if you say no more spin, you're basically buying into the Tory media narrative that we were all about spin, we didn't do anything. And if you say no more sleaze, it completely chops off your ability to raise funds which you need for a modern professional campaign. So I think it was fine on one level, but it's one of those things that was like fine for a day, but then when you reckon with the consequences, you're the loser.
It's interesting because it is obviously a very different volume to the. I was looking back at the first one last night, which came out in 2010, I think, the 94-97 volume.
Yeah.
And actually,
I think you've got to get out more, Matthew.
I do, but you keep writing volumes, you see, and I keep staying in.
It's fine to read the new ones, but to go back as well.
No, well, I'm hopeless. But the interesting thing about the first one is that actually you're so wound up about winning. You are
losing.
Or losing.
Yeah,
you are wrapped real tight. And I understand that because the party's been through this very long valley. This volume of course it describes a period which leads up to Labour leaving office, but personally, although you have your ups and downs, you seem to me to be more serene. Now, was that personal? Was that political? Was it an awareness that an era was coming to an end? What was that?
God, it's really interesting you say that, because I didn't feel serene at all during this period. I felt completely trapped and conflicted.
I mean, obviously there was a lot of conflict about what role you should play, because Gordon wanted you to come in, go to the Lords, be a minister, and be absolutely back at the heart of it. And you, I think, probably rightly, had a kind of sense that was probably not right. But you were still, in many ways, emotionally and often physically at the heart of it, weren't you?
I was physically at the heart of it, particularly towards the end, but I was emotionally. And I think this was hard for Gordon, because I think part of him thought this was me saying, to put it sort of crudely in the psychodrama, you don't like Tony as much as you like me, kind of thing. And it wasn't really that. It was, I mean, obviously I was incredibly close to Tony because of all the things that we'd sort of been through together.
You mean you like Tony more than me?
Yeah. Sorry. So I felt that he was, but it's really, really hard. This is where the kind of conflict inside me was coming from that wasn't making me serene. It's interesting you think that, because I wasn't serene. I don't know how many mentions my psychiatrist gets in this one, but it's quite a lot.
Yeah.
Because I was.
But you see, that I see as a sign of.
Oh, maybe I'm finding serenity that maybe.
You mentioned the visits to the psychiatrist as part of a process of dealing with life, its ups and downs.
But also, what we talk about a lot of the time is the conflict that I'm feeling about this clash between a sense of duty.
Yes.
To the Labour Party, to Gordon.
To the country.
To the country, but also a sense of. No, I wouldn't say to the country in that context, because if it had been a Tory asking me, a Tory Prime Minister, I wouldn't feel that same thing.
No, sure, of course not. No.
So, but it was this sense of this tribalism that was driving me, which had been a little bit eroded, but not much. But also the feeling that I had kind of deep inside that, you know, I suppose having had a really bad episode of mental illness back in the 80s, that I sort of felt towards the end I wasn't there, but I felt if this goes on much longer I will be. And so I was trapped and conflicted. And I also had the thing where, interestingly, because I think the other thing that for me makes the diaries sometimes quite painful is that within the family context, that Fiona and I, having had been through a very bad period in the run-up to the Iraq War for political and personal reasons, very intertwined, I'm sort of just getting that back together. And actually, she's almost becoming one of the ones that's saying, you've got to go back in and help them. This is terrible. What if the Tories win again? And I'm thinking, and Philip Gould is saying, literally saying two directly contradictory things at the same time. You mustn't do this; it'll be really bad for you. You've got to get back in. You've got to do this, otherwise. And it's like,
but this is the Gouldian paradox, isn't it?
Yeah.
You know.
So and Gordon and Tony was sort of saying, don't do it unless you really want to, but I think you probably should.
Yes.
And Gordon was. You know, I've said before, Gordon, when he's in killer driller mode, it's very hard to resist. And if you are a British patriot, which I am, if you're a Labour loyalist, which I am, even though currently it's been hard, it's bloody hard when a Labour Prime Minister says to you, and even though you know it's kind of laying on the flattery with the trowel to make you do what they want, literally says to you, I can't do this unless you come back.
There's a very touching bit where you email your son. On pros and cons. I thought that was a very touching bit, and it showed that you were just how difficult it is, because clearly you're thinking this is this salvageable, but on the other hand you're thinking, but I can't not get involved. And
what was interesting, that was Rory, my older boy, and he was probably the one member of the family who was really saying, you've got to do it. And he almost said, I can't bother with all this pros and cons stuff. It's just like, there is a very big pro. You could help Labour win, and that stops a very big con, which is the Tories might win.
Yes.
And then, I've got I hope I've got a realistic assessment of my own kind of character and abilities. And I don't necessarily think that one person within a campaign can make all the difference, but you do sometimes, and I'll be honest, I sometimes do kind of in the context of Brexit now, sometimes lie awake at night and I think, oh God, maybe if I'd done what Gordon said right at the start, if I'd gone back, maybe he'd have beaten Cameron. If we hadn't have had Cameron, we wouldn't have had Brexit. We wouldn't have had Brexit. It's all my fault. And you sort of do this kind of beat yourself up.
It's an interesting question, that, because, I mean, people will write histories of the coalition, and one of the things that they'll say is, if there hadn't been a Tory-led government, let's say, and if Cameron hadn't gone in 2013 for the option of an in-out referendum, was there a way of avoiding this moment of reckoning? Because Tony nearly had it, didn't he, with the constitutional treaty, and had that treaty not fallen, there would have been a referendum. He clearly was minded at various points to do something with the euro. That didn't come off. At some point there was going to be a referendum on Europe, wasn't there? Now, was there a way of framing that wouldn't have led to the disaster zone we're in now, do you think?
I just don't know the answer to that.
I mean, I suppose a referendum on the euro, which had ended up with no, let's say, would not actually have led to any national disaster, would it?
No, that's true. But even though God, it's such a hard question because you really can't prove the counterfactuals.
You can't. No, it's true.
But I think that, and it's interesting when you said there, there might have been a referendum on a new constitutional arrangement, and well, there might.
Well, he said there would be, didn't he?
I know.
Yeah.
I know. But I think, for example, one of the reasons we're in this mess, I wonder, but you know better than I do, but I wonder whether David Cameron, in his heart, didn't think he was going to get a majority in 2015, and thought that maybe that would be the price of another bout of cleggery, would be actually to say,
yeah,
well, we won't do the referendum, and without majority it's
yeah,
the same. I don't know, but I think that
they were certainly surprised.
David Cameron definitely thought, because I spoke to him. It was strange to be on the same side, and latterly I went back to work with Craig Oliver and on the campaign, and I several times said to Cameron, I said, why are we doing this? Why do you? And he was adamant there was no way he couldn't do it, and I don't think that's true. I think he could have done it. I think it was the easy way out for him to offer a referendum. It was, I've said in my book about winners, I think it was, which he's not as a winner, he's in as an example of losing. I think that it was one of his many examples of where a tactic replaces a strategy.
Yeah.
The referendum was a tactic, he didn't have a strategy for Europe, he didn't really have a strategy for the country. So, I don't know is the short answer to your question, but I do think we're in the mess that we're in. I'm not denying that some of the reasons you aren't starting to see them in that in this volume, and indeed in previous volumes. Were we fast enough to see what was happening in these communities that were being impacted negatively in their minds by immigration? Were we fast enough? We definitely weren't fast enough, and this is something I argued with Tony about when he was still Prime Minister. I felt that on the question of the technological revolution and globalisation, we were too caught up with it being a kind of really cool thing, and really, this is good for the world. And now it is, and it has been in the main. But there was a sense of a growing inequality of people that didn't feel part of it. And then when you get to the crash with Gordon, which I think, and I think in many ways it was his finest hour as leader, but he did to some extent save the world economy. Yeah. But when we got to that point, as we've come out of that, I do honestly think that what Trump and Brexit are partly about is a feeling of a lot of people that the people who caused the crash basically got away with it, the bankers in particular, and the people who paid a price had nothing to do with causing it.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is what fuels a lot of this anger that we keep hearing about.
So on globalisation, I think you're right, but I think you're wrong to imply that somehow it was just you. I think everybody, the problem was that everybody saw globalisation as this modern, undeniably growth-generating force.
Yeah.
It was something that, if you like, was the basis of some form of consensus between the parties. And I think there was an assumption, which I certainly shared to a way excessive extent, that the growth globalisation created would be fairly shared.
Well, see, it's interesting that you did think that, because that is one thing that Tony and I used to argue about all the time. And I did feel that this was that was not happening.
Yeah.
I felt there was a fairly substantial proportion of the country that wasn't feeling it really at all. And I felt.
Do you mean geographically, or in terms of socioeconomic background, or both?
Well, I think more socioeconomically, but also so. I think, for example, I've just been doing a TV thing this morning, and this one of the things that drives me crazy is this idea that there's this sort of that London, everybody's really well off and everything's buzzing. I mean, you've got some of the worst poverty in the country.
Absolutely,
but if you go to, I do think actually going to Burnley, as I do regularly for the football, I was getting an increasing sense of this is not touching people equally.
Yeah.
Whereas I do think when Tony was Prime Minister, I think one of his great strengths was this: he constantly felt the need that whatever it was we were doing, there had to be an understanding this was for the whole country. And I think with globalisation, we just got a bit too caught up in it.
So what would have, and what now should be, because we all talk now, it's now kind of baked into centre-left, centre-ground thinking that we got globalisation wrong.
We got it partly wrong.
Partly wrong.
Yeah.
And there are things that we need to do to ameliorate its pathologies and problems.
Yeah.
But what? I mean, this is the big question. Is it through labour market regulation?
Mm-hmm.
Is it through is it through a more intelligent benefit structure? Is it better education? What is it? I mean, what are the things we need to do?
I mean, even when we were asking that question back then, I don't know that we had the answer. So, for example, if you take immigration,
Yeah.
you know, we're not deaf and we don't have cloth ears, and ministers and MPs and their advisors do spend a lot of time going around the country and listening and hearing. So we knew there was a problem politically. What we couldn't work out was what was the policy solution that didn't actually damage those areas.
And the NHS and mutilate, exactly,
and damage the economy and,
Yeah.
and damage the sort of public services in their areas. And so, and that's another of the reasons why we're in this mess, is
Yes.
because people wanted to politically play into this sense that, you know, too many immigrants coming over, taking our jobs.
Do you think Remain should have? Do you think Remain in 2016 should have had a positive narrative about immigration?
Yeah, definitely.
Because it was conspicuously lacking, wasn't it?
It was, yeah. I think that when you look back at it, I kind of understand it at the time, because, you know. But I do think with Cameron, he was fighting the same battle that he'd already won. He was running basically the same campaign that he ran in Scotland, and that he ran against Ed Miliband.
Yes, exactly.
Economy is all that matters. Project Fear. That was really it.
Yeah.
And the fact that the other side were able to label it like that, I don't think they were quick enough to realise that was going to damage them, and that damage still plays on now. Even though bad stuff is happening, and it's factual
Yes.
rather than predictive, people can say, "Oh, this is all just Project Fear." So I think,
and they mobilised emotion, didn't they? I mean, theirs was. Remain was as you say, a classic Project Fear thing based on statistics, forecasts. Leave and Leave.eu, which was kind of the paramilitary provisional wing of the. I never believed in the great separation, by the way, between those two outfits. Absolutely played upon emotion. You know, immigration, NHS, sovereignty. Look out for Turkey.
Yeah.
It was absolutely straightforward. There was no real institutional or factual message at all.
That's what's really interesting about what you said earlier about that. You know, the reputation that we had for the sort of campaigning and communications we did. But actually, we felt really kind of icky about doing stuff that went too far. I don't know what the equivalent of Turkey would have been, but I know that I wouldn't have felt comfortable doing it. I don't. If the thing about the £350 million a week for the health service on the side of a bus, I don't know what the equivalent of that would be. But I know I can think back to campaigns when I was involved in with Tony. There's no way he would have done that.
Yeah.
Because he would have, at the intellectual level, he would have said, "Look, I'm not going to do that because it's going to get picked apart, and I don't want the person who's having to explain something that I know is not true."
Yeah.
The Trumpian thing, that Boris Johnson,
the post-truth,
post-truth thing is that I know back at Leave HQ they were going, "Oh yeah, now the stats guys have attacked him.
Yes.
We can say we don't like experts."
Yes.
Now that it's on the telly again. And all the people they were appealing to was saying, as you say, they were playing into an emotional argument.
Denial is a win because you get to say it again, and you get
Now, what you do with that, I just don't know. I don't know what you do with that. I think that's one of the things that campaigns are struggling with around the world. Is how do you, if you're a Democrat at the moment in the United States, you're starting to think about the next election. How do you play in a campaign where you don't want to tell lies, you don't want to be personally abusive the whole time, but how do you handle that against somebody who doesn't care about telling lies and who will say black is white, and even though there'll be the empirical proof there in front of both of you that black is not white, he'll still say it is. How do you deal with that?
Well, one of the things about populism, which is having a real time in the sun, is that it proposes simple solutions to complex problems.
It is really, yeah.
That's its definition, isn't it?
And it's simple solutions which play to emotion rather than reason.
Right.
That's what I think populism is.
Yeah.
And you know, without overstating it too much, Hitler was a master of it.
Yes.
I think that I'm not sure Trump is a master of it in that is what he does, and he's become president. I still think it could become his undoing, but I could be wrong about that.
But is it partly that we've lost the gift of narrative? Because let's go back to 97. There was a definite sort of core hard policy message at the heart of New Labour about the binding of social justice to economic competence. Got it. But there was undoubtedly also a very strong narrative sense that this was a country on the rise. It was young, it was exciting, it was open. There was a real story there.
Yeah, the story was modernisation.
Yeah,
and that was the message, and that was the strategy,
and
that pinned it all together.
And you'd struggle, I think, now in mainstream politics in this country to find a message with anything like that power. I mean, Corbyn has a message about himself and a kind of social justice message of a much more basic kind, but it doesn't have that dynamism.
But that's because people think, when they talk about this narrative, they think, oh, here they go, New Labour, it's all spin. Narrative.
That's not what I don't mean spin at all.
I'm not saying that at all, but that's how they can sort of say we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
But narrative to me is it's the means by which you develop, communicate, and execute a political strategy.
Exactly.
And in government, a policy strategy.
Yeah.
And that's what we did. The reason why we were seen as control freaks is because if a policy was being developed that didn't speak to one of those things that you talk about, well, how does that work with trying to modernise the country? How does that work to a new relationship between employer and employee? How does that relate to public services that are there not for the producer but for the consumer? So these were big strategic messages, and I think that, look, Theresa May, I just don't think operates at that sort of level politically anyway. I think she's a kind of much more managerial sort of figure, and she's completely consumed by Brexit. That's the only priority they've got. I think Jeremy Corbyn, it's interesting that you said that you think it's about him. I hadn't really thought about that, but actually there's a lot in that. And insofar as they have a policy message, it's anti-austerity.
Yes.
But that's defining themselves against something that it's already had. It's a new politics in a sort, but because it's so seen as kind of...
And it's a bit of false consciousness. It's the old idea that, the British public have just been waiting for the right kind of socialist appeal.
See, I mentioned the Winners book. One of my favourite quotes in there is from Gary Kasparov, the chess player, who says that waiting for your opponents to fail is not a strategy.
Yes.
And it's not. So even on Brexit, I understand this thing that Barry Gardner keeps saying, quotes Napoleon, don't interrupt your enemy while he's making a mistake. Well, I don't know the context in which Napoleon said that.
At what point?
I have to tell you, it is not how Napoleon operated.
No.
He basically was somebody who,
if you made a mistake,
if you were down on the floor, you put your foot on the neck and you absolutely...
When they punch down, we kick them. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
So I just think that's a mistake. I think the thing about our system as well, very different to Napoleon, our system is that you have a government and you have an opposition, and the country is constantly actually looking at both. Not obviously they look at the government more intently because they're the government and they're making decisions that affect your lives every day. But they do have that sense of, they're looking at the opposition. What would the opposition do? What will they be like? And that's where it becomes, I think, you mentioned Volume 1, the opposition years. We were on that 24 hours a day.
I remember Jack Straw saying to me years ago that the problem Labour had was that everyone thought it had been in power since 1994.
Yeah.
I thought it was a very astute remark, actually, because the Tories in that period were in such decay, and you were sorted and organised, and agenda, And I remember there was a party political which just had Tony meeting foreign leaders, and he already, I don't know whether it was 95 or 96, but he already looked like that. Even though he wasn't Prime Minister, he looked like the
right. And that's interesting.
The ex officio head.
We were probably doing that because one of the things we were worried about was that people thought, oh, he looks a bit young, he looks a bit sort of Bambi, he's a bit too fresh-faced, would he actually be able to cut it with these guys?
Yeah.
And of course he could, and just seeing him shake hands with Helmut Kohl was, no, so I do think now, interestingly, I think that the pressures now, particularly the sort of relentlessness of the 24/7 social media, people at you the whole time, there's no doubt the pressures are in some ways greater. But the response, in my mind, means you should be more strategic, not less.
Yes.
And the ones who I think are doing this well, I don't yet include Trump in that. I think you'd have to include Trump, regretfully, if he did win again, and if the economy continued to improve, all that. I hate myself even for saying it and thinking it, but
no, but it's an empirical observation. It's not a value judgment.
Yeah, but I think that at the moment, if I look around, I think Macron potentially.
Yeah.
But again, all depends on him winning again. I think Merkel is clearly at that. She sort of seems to me to feel like
exactly.
That it's coming to a natural end.
Yes.
How it ends is a very big question for the future of Europe and for the future of Germany. But if I look at our own politics, I think the only one really you'd say is even remotely operates like this is Nicola Sturgeon.
Yeah, which is not a very high tally for
a UK
country of
one of the most important countries in the world.
Exactly. Let's talk about the People's Vote. We came out at Drugstore Culture for the People's Vote on day one going live. I had a bit of a journey because I was initially concerned about the potential for a populist right backlash. I was also concerned about the idea of Parliament throwing back a decision to the people. I'm afraid that it's simply become such a pressing problem that I can see no alternative to it. And also, I think, I'm not sure how I'd be able to look my kids in the face if I hadn't said I'd tried. How did you get to backing the vote? What was the Alastair Campbell story of backing a People's Vote?
Well, I think I was funny. I saw Nick Clegg the other day, and we were chatting about this, and he said, if you think back after the referendum, there was a very, very small number of us who basically from June the 24th, 2016, said, if you really believe something, if you really think something's going to be a disaster for the country, you have to do what you can to stop it. So I've never hidden the fact that I've always been in the Stop Brexit camp.
Yeah.
Now, I've accepted that is very difficult. I thought it's funny how Gary Lineker has emerged as this sort of this wonderful political voice. But he did a video for us at the People's Vote campaign the other day.
Yes.
And he made this observation. He said, look, when the referendum happened, I voted Remain. I was really sad about it. But I thought, well, the people have voted. You've just got to get on with it and keep your head down and let the government do what they do. But he now looks at it, as you just said, and there's so many people do, say, well, hold on a minute, they don't appear able to deliver this.
And nor could one really honestly say this is what anyone voted for.
If you were to write down, right, Brexit as it's going to be put to Parliament is this.
Yes.
Right, it's like we're going to pay loads of money, we're going to have this kind of really vague kind of customs union-y type
so
of
we take
thing.
rules.
We're going to have their rules, and we won't have any say over them, okay? And there's all this other stuff that nobody ever talked about during this thing about, pet passports, or all this sort of stuff, medicines. We're going to have to stockpile medicines just in case, because we don't quite know what's going to happen. If you'd have said this is what you're voting for, I mean, literally zero people would have voted for it. And yet now, because we had a vote on June the 23rd, 2016, 17.4 million voted, and the Brexit extremists will say, they all knew this is what they were voting for. Of course they did. And yet in the same breath, John Redwood, Nigel Farage, they said, well, this is a mess. This is terrible. This is rubbish. I mean, how could we can't do this? So I just have never known a situation like this. So I got involved really from the start, and then all these different groups started to form. Best for Britain, Open Britain carried on as...
And you've got these youth groups as well now, FFS. And it's very interesting.
Well, I was really... I like to think I was involved at the ground floor of that, because actually I started to do a thing where I was constantly being inundated with media bids, like you are if you've kind of got a profile and a voice. And I was saying, well, I can't do it, but I've got somebody for you. I've got this guy called Femi. I've got Will Dry, I've got Lara Spirit. They have them. They're much better. And I think that has been an interesting thing. But we had all these different groups, and then there were lots of discussions went on between all the different groups. And so now what's happened is that the People's Vote umbrella, everybody, apart from Best for Britain, but the cooperation with them is really good as well, but everybody's under the same, literally under the same roof. And that has been, I think... but then it's just a sort of, I don't get paid. I don't want to get paid. I do this stuff because I believe in it. I do all my other stuff, my books and my speeches and my consultancy and my campaigning abroad, and I do all that stuff, my mental health campaigning in particular. But I just feel this so strongly. I feel it's like you just said about your kids. Funny enough, I interviewed Miriam. She'll slap me if I say Miriam Clegg. Miriam
Gonzalez.
Who, by the way, I was speaking to a Spanish politician the other day, and we were talking about, because this is a campaign where we're having to, keep eyes on the stuff around Europe as well.
Yeah.
So I said, who's the British voice that really cuts through with the Spanish? And she said, Miriam.
Miriam, yeah,
Miriam,
that's interesting.
But she said this. I did an interview with her for GQ, and she said several things that have really stuck with me, and that actually have guided the way that I've thought about this through the campaign. One thing she said was, which I now use everywhere I go: name me a country, any time in history, democracy and dictatorship, that built success by governing against the interests of young people.
Yes.
Brilliant. The other thing she said was, all of us have a responsibility now. It's one of those moments in history where all of us have a responsibility to do what we think is right, if only so that when we're old, we can look at our children and grandchildren and say, I really tried.
Yeah.
I really tried. So I'm kind of in that boat, really.
Me too, yeah,
I
absolutely.
just feel if you don't try, and the thing is, the latest diaries, the Gordon Brown years, I think it comes through that, again, partly because of my own moods at the time, I'm not enjoying the campaign. I'm really enjoying this campaign because I feel we're winning. I feel we've gone from 5% chance to 35%
now why
chance.
is that? Because I agree with you, but what do you think is it? I mean, it can't just be that the absurdity of the situation has become more apparent. What's happened? How has it bitten? I mean, for a start, the phrase "people's vote" has entered common language, which is always a win.
Which didn't happen to Stronger In, it didn't happen to Open Britain, it didn't happen to Best for Britain. No, I think that's interesting, and I think that partly it's about lots of us put together a proper campaign.
Yeah.
With proper campaign personnel and structures and so forth. But I think also it's come at a time where the people who've delivered Brexit have either run for the hills, like David Cameron, or have shown that they actually are all about themselves, like Boris Johnson, or have shown that they don't have the capacity and the competence to deliver it, like David Davis. So Theresa May's there almost as the last woman standing. And I thought what was tragic about her statement in the Commons the other day, 100 minutes in the House of Commons, 100 minutes, that's a big
Gladstonian statement, yeah.
And not a single voice apart from her own actually spoke in favour of what she was promoting. Well, if Parliament is about representing the people, how can they then, on the other hand, say, we should vote for this? Whether they're Labour or Tory, how can they possibly say, we're going to vote for this, we're going to make it happen? So I think what the campaign has done is, actually you talked about the kind of narrative of the campaign. The last march, where we got around about 100,000, maybe a bit more, before that, it was so hard to get anybody interested.
Yes.
We couldn't get celebs, we couldn't get business voices, we couldn't get big speakers. The fact that people turned out in those numbers without virtually no media build-up at all, that was the point for me where the media thought,
there's something there.
Here.
Yeah.
And I think this one, my kind of strategic thought for this one is this has got to be the point where the MPs sit up and they think, we can't ignore this. We may think we lose votes and we lose support by, quotes, not delivering Brexit, but look at those numbers. We lose support if we don't actually give these people's vote. Interestingly, there's the guy down in Cheltenham, Alex, is it James? Alex James or something?
Yeah.
So I think he was a Remainer, I could be wrong. But I know for a fact that we've got 5-6 coaches coming out of Cheltenham on Saturday morning. Now I always used to have a golden rule. If somebody goes on a march, 10 people thought about it.
Yeah.
So if we do get a big number, we're not going to. You're probably never going to have a march in Britain like the Iraq, which was 1.7 million, whatever it was. But and also now a lot of activism. People think activism is tweeting and Facebook posting.
Yes.
I'm not saying it's not.
No, I know, but it's not the same.
It's not the same. But I think if we get a big number, every single MP ought to understand that there are people from their constituencies there who are motivated, who are mobilised, and who are not going to forgive politicians if they vote through what they in their hearts know is the wrong thing for the country. So I think we've just sort of, it's coming together at the right time in a way. And look, we're in such crazy times. Something could happen Friday night that suddenly it all comes together. It's hard to see how. But if you think back to the weekend, just this weekend, the message coming out was they're on the verge of
a deal. Yeah.
It could be through Parliament, but in a week.
Yeah.
Right. I was getting panic phone calls from some of our people saying, "What the fuck do we say if she gets through?" And she says she's going to be voting Commons on Monday. Well, it hasn't happened. It's fallen
Yeah.
apart, as it has so many times before.
Yes.
And I think what's happening is, it's not that Theresa May is a terrible Prime Minister, it's that Brexit is the problem.
Yes. Well, the problem is that people want Brexit both to involve total and utter secession from the EU, but they want to retain all the benefits of EU membership, which is not
And also,
very
it's
sensible.
like, if you look at just one part of it, I'm obsessed with the Irish side of the argument. But you've got and having worked with Tony through the peace process, I know how utterly unreasonable the DUP can be.
Yeah.
And also how incredibly important they are in Northern Ireland politics.
Yeah.
But they're basically saying, right, we want a absolute clean break from the European Union, but we don't want any change to the border. Well, you can't have that. Why can't we have that? That's what we want. Well, how are you going to deliver it? Well, that's not our job. We're not in government. Not only they're not in government, they're not even in government in the place where they've been elected to govern.
Yes. So what we have, it seems to me, well, they aren't in government, but they are propping up the government here.
Absolutely.
Of course, which makes
But they're
life...
saying to Theresa May, don't ask me what the problem is. I know what the problem is.
Just give me a solution.
Just do
Once
it.
again,
You're the Prime
the
Minister, just do it.
populist dilemma.
Exactly.
So I agree with you. I think we are in good shape on this. I mean, as good shape as we could hope to be at this point, anyway.
I'll tell you the other thing, which you get sort of little signals and signs everywhere. It was really interesting last night on the tube. We got two donors who have been on saying, desperate to help. What can we do?
Yeah.
What can we do? And so we raised the money to do a 4-page ad in the Standard, a wraparound
Yes.
advert in the Standard. So now I'm not pretending that is sort of itself a great thing to have to do.
It's not nothing, though.
No, but also I'll tell you what was interesting. Last night, I got on the tube. I sort of stuck away in a corner and I sat there and I was watching. There were 5 people in my carriage who were looking at the Standard. 3 of them were reading the copy
Oh, really?
of the advert. I thought, that's interesting.
It's interesting.
That's interesting. Literally, not just looking at the front.
No, but
Page
actually
2,
looking at the stuff.
saying what it was about.
Yeah.
I thought that's interesting.
That is interesting. So, finally, Sarah, we just wanted to look a little bit at your mental health campaigning, which you've done so much for. And something that I have a gripe about is every year or so, maybe more, the government says mental health is going to have parity of esteem with the NHS.
And it's going to be a priority.
And it's going to be a priority, which is... are we anywhere near that being the case, do you think?
Yeah, we are, in part because of the campaigning.
Yeah.
Which is, I think there's a parity developing of understanding and awareness, which I think is a good thing. And to be fair to the government, they've supported that, not least with cash, and Nick Clegg was actually a big part of that. The Time to Change campaign is funded by Comic Relief, the lottery, but it has government money as well. And I think what I like about the Time to Change campaign is not just about saying we need more money for services, it's actually about saying if we change the way people think about this, that can actually change things on the ground as well. But the problem I have with the whole services thing, I worry that the decision makers and the policy makers, they always use this public awareness thing, changing the way we think and talk about it, as a substitute for services. If I go to one more government event where people say, a minister stands up and saying, it's fantastic, everybody's talking about it, and I always say, do you know what, I'm sick to death of talking about it.
Yeah.
I'm sick to death of having to talk about it because we still need to campaign on this.
Yes.
So, and I thought, for example, last week on World Mental Health Day, Theresa May again took an interest and she announced this thing, Suicide Prevention Minister. Okay, fine. But unless it's backed up by a real strategy, unless it's backed up by real resources, what impact is it going to have? It's like I look at Rory Stewart at the moment, and he did a very bold thing when he said that if he doesn't sort out the prisons in a year, he's going to resign. I mean, I've got to say, I think it's impossible because I think everything's impossible with Brexit at the moment.
Yes, the bandwidth just isn't there. Yeah.
But secondly, unless you have something as bold as that, unless you have the Prime Minister, the Chancellor and the Home Secretary absolutely banging that drum the whole time, I don't think it's going to happen. And I think with mental health, I feel that we're making progress, but I do feel on the policy side and the political side, an awful lot of it is lip service.
And what would be your wish list? If you had to sort of name 3 or 4 things that you'd like to see happen in terms of policy, not awareness building, but actual policy. What are the things that we should be pressing for?
They are actually to some extent related. So, but I'll give you 3 or 4. I think if you look at waiting times,
yeah,
the David Cameron did a speech once, and he said, and the news out of the speech was, it's the first time ever that a Prime Minister has devoted a speech just to mental health. Oh. Right, well, okay.
Okay, yeah.
And he said this thing, he said that, we're going to set new waiting times, and he said, if, for example, you have psychosis, you will be seen within 48 hours. I thought, hold on a minute, I've had psychosis. The physical equivalent of psychosis is a car crash.
Right.
You've gone through the windscreen. You're rolling down the motorway.
So you need the equivalent of A&E. You need
it there and there.
Yeah.
And so I think the understanding that there is the physical equivalent of accident and emergency.
Yes.
Now listen, there are some great places. I've been to some of these psychiatric intensive care units. They're amazing. I went to one in Liverpool a while back. It's amazing.
Are these inside mainstream hospitals?
They
or
can be.
Yeah,
they're closed.
Yeah.
But this place was phenomenal. There were 8 beds.
Right.
For the whole Merseyside. So intensive psychiatric care is a reality, and we don't treat it as such. So what's happening is that people are going to, and listen, by the way, I think the voluntary sector organisations do an amazing job, and I'm the patron of the only suicide sanctuary in the country.
Which is
called the Maytree in Finsbury Park.
Right.
And again, has a very, very small number of beds. So the first thing is that understanding of the difference between, we want parity, but let's not pretend that you're applying the same sort of rules and waiting times to that. The second thing I would say is I do think that if we invested, and here I use the word investment and I mean it in the literal sense, investing to produce. If we invested in the mental health and well-being of children in schools, we would save so much money down the track. And I know that everybody says, well, put the money in there and you save it. But I honestly believe with this that if we think about the problems that we're looking at, literally when we see it on the streets all the time now, people living on the streets, most of them mentally ill. They didn't choose to be there. They didn't. The art that they've gone through, a lot of it might involve marital breakdown. It might be drugs. It might be.
It's not an aspirational arc.
No,
is it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
It might be the military. It might be guys coming out of the military who find they can't cope with the return to civilian life. It might be PTSD. All of these things that are real. But I sort of feel that we're pushing them aside. So what I'd like to see is all of these things brought right to the centre, not just of the health department, but of the criminal justice system, of the education system, and then we're understanding. And this is what I said. I spoke. To be fair to him, Matt Hancock asked me to do an event at the Global World Mental Health Summit, which he organised. And there were some really interesting things that were happening there. But my favourite was this thing from Zimbabwe. Now, how many psychiatrists do you think there are in Zimbabwe? 4.
4.
Now, there are lots of faith healers.
Yes.
And, but 4 psychiatrists,
clinical psychiatrists,
we would recognise are qualified to treat psychiatric illness. So that's not a lot.
It is not a lot.
But the Zimbabweans had this scheme, which actually I think it's the sort of thing, when David Cameron's Big Society was meant to mean something, this could have been part of something like that. They have this thing called the Friendship Bench. And the Friendship Bench is literally a wooden bench. And the person who goes and sits on that bench is usually a grandmother. And that grandmother is trained in counselling. And they sit on this bench and people go and talk to these grannies on the Friendship Bench. And the granny will also know that down the road there's a sports group, and they go running every Tuesday night. And you might fancy that.
Sure.
You might fancy going that. And they know that there's a peer-to-peer thing here and what have you. And I just thought, God, what a brilliant idea!
It is a brilliant idea.
And then I thought, how could that be applied here? So I think within this, I'm the first in the queue to bang the drum. We need more money.
Yes.
But I also think a lot of these policy solutions are not necessarily about money at all. They're about how do we get this out into the community. I think business has a massive role to play. I mean, back to Brexit, which I never go more than 5 minutes without saying Brexit's terrible.
I think you have, actually.
Well, maybe I did. But I was out the other day with Charlie Mullins, Pimlico Plumbers. And okay, Charlie Mullins he's been through the courts on some of the employment laws and what have you, but he's on the side of the Angels on Brexit, I'm sure, and he's got his wonderful bollocks to Brexit campaign and what have you. Anyway, so I went down there because he was unveiling a new poster to advertise the march. And so I went in for a cup of tea and a little look around, and this guy came up to me and he says, "God, you're looking well, you're looking fit." I said, "Oh," I said, "Yeah, I work out every day, and I'm taking up boxing." And
I didn't know you were taking up boxing.
Yeah,
That's
I like
interesting.
boxing. And he said, "Oh, you're doing boxing?" He said, "Well, come down here." What do you mean? I said, "What do you mean?" He says, he went and showed me the gym
Really?
at Pimlico Plumbers. Now that it was really impressive, right? And now that's
impressive.
to me is part of mental health.
Of course.
If you can say to you as an employer to your workforce, I not only do I give you free gym membership, I build you a gym.
Yes.
You can use it. And the other thing I think...
And also boxing is a lot better than a treadmill.
The treadmills are there too, by the way.
No, nothing wrong with the treadmill, but
yeah.
in terms of discipline and focus, boxing is meditation in action. It's amazing.
The whole thing. I mean, I have a guy comes to the house and we just do the pads and stuff.
Yeah.
He doesn't hit me because I fall over, but it's like, so that sort of thing about... Now that's mental health. That's what I mean by investment. And then I think the other thing that's important within this is I think that again, this is not just for government, it's about the voluntary sector as well, but mental health research is a desert compared to the other areas of health. So my brother had schizophrenia and he died a couple of years ago, and one of the reasons he died age 62 is because the antipsychotic drugs haven't really changed since One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, and we know that they have terrible side effects, and we know that they make it very hard for you to fight infections and so forth. So just imagine if there's Theresa May who has diabetes, I have asthma. Imagine if we were every day taking a drug for those diseases that we knew was taking 20 years of us. Do you really think that governments and societies would tolerate that?
It's hard to imagine.
They wouldn't. So we don't have that parity.
I was going to say that's where parity of esteem means something or doesn't.
Exactly. Well,
So
so it's not just when you're asking me for the 3 or 4 things. More money, definitely.
Right.
More training, definitely. More understanding for GPs, definitely. But I think even outside the more money thing, more psychiatrists, more psychiatric nurses, more intensive care for psychiatric patients, all of that. But I think there's so much we can do out of that also would over time benefit. And that's why ultimately it really annoys me when Theresa May, I know she's got a lot of her plate and I'm sort of, I can be sympathetic on that, even though I think she's made so many mistakes in these negotiations, not least the election, not least triggering Article 50 when she didn't need to. But when she says mental health is a priority, I scream at the television and I scream, and if I see her, I'll say to her, go and look it up in a dictionary. Priority means more important than the others. And this, be honest, it's not. So when you said how close are we to it, I think we're a long way from it. Yeah.
But the message is, as you used to say to me on Friday afternoon, happy phone calls, what counts is what works.
Yeah, what counts is what works.
And what you've described is not just a sort of one size fits all or a fund. It's actually quite a subtle.
No, and also I thought that I just interviewed Matt Hancock for GQ. He was out last month, and he's come from the DCMS and he's been very big on all the digital stuff. So he has got some interesting ideas about how you can use this digital stuff for better healthcare, of which I'm supportive as long as it's not a substitute.
Yes.
I think there's lots of ways you can use it to ease pressures. And look, as we get demographic change, more and more older people living longer, dementia, Alzheimer's, all this stuff that's going to be really challenging, I think we, the campaigning side of the argument, shouldn't just be seen as we're banging the drum for more money, which we are, but actually, what can we do? I was at the DCMS Select Committee yesterday. I didn't get much attention because the robot was there.
The robot was kind of stealing the show,
stealing the show, the Select Committee show. But I was there with somebody from Great Ormond Street who was talking about the importance of art in mental health, and a researcher, Daisy Fancourt, who was just amazing in terms of the data she has in her head about the impact of exercise on mental health and well-being. And so if we could persuade local and national government to be the kind of overseer, the facilitator, the driver of a strategy that really made something of the link between exercise and well-being.
Yeah.
I mentioned Charlie Charlie Mullins, Pimlico Plumbers Gym, if every workforce had that, we're improving the nation's capacity, productivity,
and its resilience,
mental health.
Yeah, exactly.
And funny enough, I mentioned Cameron in the context of Brexit. I mean, if you think about where we are as a nation now, I wrote a piece for the New European about this a few months ago. We have what I feel to be the reverse of the Olympic spirit that we had in 2012.
Exactly, yeah.
Right? It's horrible. Those few weeks...
It happened so quickly, didn't it?
It just came and went. And we've got, Tessa Giles Memorial tomorrow, and, we just didn't bottle that and keep it and grow it. And I wrote a note to Jeremy Haywood before the Olympics, like a year or two before.
Was he Cabinet Secretary yet? Or
he was Cabinet Secretary, I think, at the time, yeah. And I said, listen, run by this. I know he thinks, anything that comes from me will smell a rat and there's a trap somewhere. There wasn't. But I wrote this paper, I hope I've still got it somewhere, and it was basically an argument for, on the back of 2012, appointing a Secretary of State for Sport and Olympic Legacy, where the junior ministers in that Secretary of State actually were not all sport and Olympic legacy. They were health, education, crime, criminal justice, prisons, whatever. And I think if we could, I still think it's possible to do this. I think the countries which really put sport at the heart of policy are doing something that it goes way beyond the fact that we've got the Premier League and we've got a great test series coming up or whatever it might be. It's about what the culture of sport, and indeed culture itself, can do to drive a nation and unite a nation. And we saw that very, very briefly. And anyway, Jeremy eventually said, I've run it by him, he's not interested. Fair enough. And I understand, the structure.
But the core idea, actually, has still got something
Well, I
about
think, we have DCMS, but it's basically D, C and M.
Yes.
Because sport, for most people, is like, it's what you see on the telly. And why should government be involved in stuff when you've got Man United and you've got Liverpool and you've got Burnley, the greatest football team in the world, as we all know?
But
I do
tell us something we don't know.
Exactly. So I do feel that was a missed opportunity. I think a Secretary of State for Sport and Olympic Legacy, really driving that, I think could have changed this country for the better, for good.
A great way to end with the mission, and another mention of this wonderful diary. Do buy it, and thank you very much, Alastair Campbell.
You don't have to buy it. But
absolutely, it'd be good if you did, wouldn't it?
Like I say, I'm working for nothing for the people's vote.
You need to
3 young children.
help. Please help Alastair.
So it's a struggle.
It's a struggle.
I'm going from here to another fundraiser, get more money for the people's vote campaign. And
every call counts.
Yeah, and the Kindle, you can do it on Kindle.
You can do it on
Kindle.
Kindle.
You don't get as money though. The author doesn't get as much
money, but it's still every little helps. Thanks, Alastair.
Thank you.